Greetings, friends, and welcome to a countdown to his coming. The new series we're doing every single week to point to those evidences all around us. The fact that we're in the last generation before Jesus returns. These are exciting days and expectant days of what God's going to do when he straightens out the mess that we've made of this world. But guess what? It's not over yet. It is going to get worse before it gets better. And we see that every single day around us. All you have to do is turn on the news or go to the grocery store or just check out what's happening on this planet. Well, for each one of these, we're going to examine an element that's never been present in the 2,000 years since Jesus came. And during many of those times, people were saying, oh, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, yet all of the elements, all the signs, all the signals of that second coming were not in place. But one sign in particular we're going to look at today is not only in place, but it's threatening just how fast, how rapidly this is coming to pass now. It was ramping up a little at the time for a while, but now it has gone into overdrive. What am I talking about? It's what I refer to in the Countdown to His Coming series as the climate of catastrophe. That is the truth that humanity has become so wicked and has so many weapons of mass destruction and different other ways to destroy life on this planet that if God just left us alone, we would eliminate it all. Matter of fact, we would eliminate all life on this planet. If you've read the book of Revelation, you know that before Jesus returns, there's actually a war that's going to take place, one that John the Apostle saw as it took place in the future and listened to the angels as they described one of the consequences of that war being that 1/3 of the earth's population would be killed. My goodness, think about how many people there are in the world today, and yet there's coming a time where 1/3 of them will lose their life in a war that's yet to be fought. Oh my goodness, what an awful thought. But Jesus told us all about this in the Olivet Discourse. I want to call your attention to Matthew chapter 24. And by the way, after that, we're going to look at what's actually happening today in some of the most frightening militaries in the world and what's happening to the good guys who are supposedly holding it all back. The United States of America, do we have any hope that our military could withstand an attack from these other enemies? With that thought in mind, Matthew chapter 24, in verse number 22. This is after Jesus talks about a time of tribulation that is coming. In that time of trouble, he says it's so bad that in verse 22, unless those days were shortened, it says in some versions, the CSB, it says were limited, and he says no one would survive. Some versions say no flesh would survive, indicating that it would not just be humans. Nothing that had life would survive the catastrophe coming because of those last days. So he says, unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days will be limited because of the elect. So what Jesus is saying is because of his people, God's family that's present in the world at that time, that he will not let us destroy everything. Oh, he's going to let it get bad because we must see just how bad it can get. And then he will step in. So my hope is not that we can just say, well, look how bad everything is going to be. No, we have all the hope in the world because we know of a Savior who's coming back to cut it short, to stop the times that would, if not interrupted, would destroy all life on planet Earth. Well, in what ways are we seeing this ramp up now? This was not even a sign or a signal until guess when? Right at the end of World War II, when the race for the atomic bomb was won by the United States of America. And dropping one of those on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II, the United States demonstrated the awful power and effect of nuclear weapons. After that, it frightened folks so much that they began to go into overdrive to say, let's limit these things. But guess what? The major other power in the world, a communist nation, known as the Soviet Union, actually Russia and all their satellites, began to ramp up the production of nuclear weapons, so the United States had to do the same thing. Matter of fact, today there are some 10 plus nations in the nuclear club that have these nuclear weapons. And what do we see of that? Well, the idea was there's supposed to be a deterrent. It's called MAD, mutually assured destruction. Hey, we've got enough nuclear weapons to wipe out all life on the planet, and so do you. So, is there a reason for you to push the button? No, because we've got so many, it'll keep you from starting World War III. And this has worked for a generation. But guess what? Things are changing now. And as we look at these weapons being multiplied in the world, even with the frightening thought of the Islamic superpower Iran, that will be biblical Persia, also gaining nuclear weapons status here shortly. And friends, we could be at a trigger point where things really take off. Add to that the war in Ukraine. With the war in Ukraine taking off the way it has, it seemed like some folks were very optimistic that if they just dared to threaten Vladimir Putin, he would back down. That has not happened. Ukraine has suffered and is falling apart today. Not something you're going to see on your left wing news media tonight here in the United States. But with power plants being destroyed, entire populations moving because they have no heat, no electricity, the Russians are slowly but surely winning that war and eliminating all of the opposition. Now the opposition is made up of NATO weapons and NATO money and NATO power, most of which is coming from the United States, and even NATO troops. Where is this going? Well, Vladimir Putin is not one to back down. And right now, in the face of all that, he's even experimenting with some of his greatest new weapons. Now, if you haven't heard about these, it's not surprising. Two things you need to be aware of. One is hypersonic technology, something that the Russians and even the Chinese are way ahead of us on. That means they have weapons that can fly so fast, undetectable because they can fly so fast, and no missile can catch up to them, that they are practically indestructible. You can't defend against them. You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to shoot it with a laser beam and stop it." No, that's not going to happen. Matter of fact, the time from which a weapon of that sort would be launched from Soviet Russia and could impact, say, the United Kingdom, it's just a few minutes and it's all over, and there would be nothing they could do about it. They are talking quite openly about this, making it a part of discussions. Foreign ministry people, not just Vladimir Putin, but many of his representatives, are speaking about just how dangerous the weapons they have are. And if the West keeps pushing them, they just might have to use them. If that's the case, what would it trigger? Oh, friends, it's something that we need to look at seriously because the Bible predicts a couple of interesting conflicts, including one centered around Israel, of which Russia is going to be a part. On top of that, add yet another brand new weapon system that's been developed. Russians have something called the Poseidon torpedo. It has recently been placed in one of their submarines, and they have some of these now that are unlike anything they've ever built before. Now, if you're a fan of Tom Clancy, as I am, and perhaps you remember that great movie, The Hunt for Red October, or maybe you read the book, what a threat it was that the Red October, that particular submarine, could quietly get close to the United States and launch some nuclear missiles. Well, these Poseidon torpedoes are far different from anything we could have ever imagined in that 1980s fiction series. Instead, the Poseidon torpedo can be launched from a submarine, travel at different speeds, can arm its nuclear weapons, and being the size of a skyscraper, can go place itself in a strategic position off the coast of the United States, several of them ready to be launched from that position when the command is given, when the electronics are alerted that it's time. Then all of them at once would go to key naval bases and or ports and explode with nuclear weaponry, wiping out not only those bases or ports, but millions of people in the process. These are the kind of weapons that Russia has now, and we have nothing to compare to it and nothing to defend against it. This is the kind of day and age we've come to. And yet we continue to send a ridiculous amount of money to the little nation of Ukraine to try to encourage other nations to do the same and fight off the Russian bear. Well, that bear has some mighty big claws. And if he is backed into a corner, what's he going to do with this power, with this ability that he has? The largest nuclear armed nation in the world. And we seem to be poking it with pins left and right to see what it's going to do. When you add to that what our military looks like, you would be wondering why in the world would such a weakling want to pick a fight? Now, you may be under the impression that America has the greatest military in the world. At one point, that was the case. But while Red China and Soviet Russia are building up their militaries, experimenting with brand new technologies, we are busy trying to make our military woke. In the Washington Examiner, there's a great article you might want to read. It's from January the 15th. It's entitled "Drag Queens Won't Win the Next War." And it talks about what's going on in our military here in the United States, a military that cannot make any of its recruitment goals, is falling short in all of them, and then trying to recoil from the fact that we dismissed a whole bunch of folks because they wouldn't take a shot. We discharged them because they didn't want to be a part of the experimental vaccine program. And so, left and right, it seems like our military is suffering and going down. But oh, our friends in Washington are working on that. What are they working on? They're working on equity, trying to make our military feel like something it is not, or not supposed to be, anyhow, especially to reduce the masculinity that seems at the heart of any good military. In fact, as this particular article goes on to point out, something crazy is going on in our own society. Now, the author of this article is Don Feder. Don Feder, and he points out that in the United States, this rise of feminism, this idea of trying to call everything masculine toxic, and this reference to toxic masculinity, it has just really hurt us as a society. He said men frequently now reject the roles that feminism has assigned them, and they're fleeing matrimony. Who wants to get involved with marriage when the other person says, I'm the one that holds all the cards and the control, and let's see what happens to you when you enter this relationship. More and more men are being damaged by it and are now saying marriage isn't for me anymore. Did you know in 1960, 45% of all males ages 18 to 24 were married? But today, the figure's 9%. I mean, who wants to get hitched to a competitor? And that's the way that we're supposed to look now at the situation between men and women. Here's what Don writes, and I quote, "Society stops working when men stop being masculine. Traditionally, a man's job was to serve and protect his woman, his children, his country. For women, it was to make a home for her husband and raise their children. Men go to war to protect their families, not the sisterhood's idea of equality. But President Biden's all woke military is working to eradicate any semblance of the warrior ethos." And with this thought in mind, I want you to think about what's happening in our military today. Through the Freedom of Information Act, recently the Wall Street Journal obtained hundreds of pages of diversity and inclusion training material coming from our brand new woke military. When you hear about some of this stuff, you'll wonder, or you won't wonder for that matter, why many of our young men don't want to join. Listen to what he writes. He says, among other gems, The brass advised service women that if they were uncomfortable having a person with male genitalia showering with them, it was their fault. Transgender soldiers should not be required or expected to modify or adjust their behavior based on the fact that they do not match other soldiers, they sniffed. Our politically correct army is always ready to fight inequality, injustice, and transphobia. Well, the next time it's deployed, a cadre of highly trained drag queens should go in first. Again, not my words, but his. Don goes on to write, the woke never hesitate to throw women under the bus while claiming to be their champions. Allowing biological males to compete in women's athletics is one example. Letting boys in skirts use the girls' room is another. I'm grateful that I was raised by a man who grew up in poverty in a cold water flat in Brooklyn. As a Jew in a tough immigrant neighborhood, he had to fight his way to school every day. Dad went to work at 14, served in World War II, and had his own business. He had more guts and integrity than any man I've ever known, but he was also gentle and kind. Now, that's the kind of American man that we used to all look up to. But in this day and age, it's hard to even determine who is a man and who is a woman. The big question, what is a woman, seems to have baffled a whole lot of people that are running our society today. So this is the military that's going to face up against Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the Chinese, and the Russians, and the Iranians for that matter. The Iranians now putting warships in the Panama Canal, having practiced on the Caspian Sea how to launch that singular nuclear weapon up over our country in the sky, where it would start an electromagnetic pulse that would wipe out all the electronics in our country. What kind of military have we prepared to fight these menaces? Are we ready for it? Friends, every single indicator out there says we are not. The things we are most concerned with, putting the most energy and the most money into, are not the things that will be deterrents to these evil and wicked powers. Yes, we live in the day Jesus spoke of. We are exactly in the time where he said, unless those days are limited, those days are shortened, no flesh would be saved alive. Thanks be unto God that they will be shortened, because, my friends, Jesus is coming. In the meantime, we have to look at this situation that's surrounding us and ask, who in their right mind would be doing what's being done in America today? Now, the answer is no one. That's why you can be assured that the minds of our people, because of our sin, because of our rejection of God, their minds have been corrupted, and it's setting us up for a great fall. In the meantime, my friends, we're going to keep looking up. We're going to keep putting our hope and our trust in Jesus. And we're going to keep watching the signs and signals, knowing that it's pointing toward our blessed hope. Well, God bless you. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. If you like it, share it, and let's keep on getting the word out as we prepare for the days ahead, because Jesus is coming back for his church. God bless you.